everyone, it is episode 321 of This Is Whole Life. And if you haven't been enjoying this set of podcasts, this set of messages, this set of movies, then I'm really not sure what would make life better at this point, because I've thoroughly enjoyed all of them, and you guys are going to be impressed in just a second. Because guess who saw the movie?
Oh, finally,
yeah. Me.
And the best part was that you have seen how many of the movies before this? So,
Zero.
Ken's favorite movies are apparently not on Randy's list.
Well, and it's not that I didn't want to see the movies. And to be fair, I did see a few snippets of Inside Out, but that was, Dad, you're sleeping. What?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm not sleeping. Knock it off. I'm not sleeping. And the other movies I had heard of, and they weren't like movies I didn't want to see, just for whatever reason, hadn't. And today,
So your life is now richer.
It is richer.
There
now,
we go.
In full transparency, it wasn't before the message, but it was before the podcast. So, because today we have 50-inch TVs as editing monitors here at Duck Duck Productions, and Stanley's like, "Hey, I've got HBO on here, so let's go ahead and check out the movie." So I did watch the movie this afternoon, and it did definitely enhance the experience. What a great movie!
What a great movie!
It really was.
Who would have thought Mos Def?
Yeah,
was
right?
a great actor. I wouldn't if you'd put the name up. I would have said I don't know. I mean, and then you put Mos Def with Alan Rickman. I don't know. I mean,
what does Hans Gruber know about anything?
Right.
That's what I just didn't.
So, I mean, I don't know what you're talking about, but
I don't either,
but
of
I
course.
hear you. Yeah. Okay. But no, I mean, just a phenomenal performances from everybody in the movie, and for my money, they should have won awards for that.
They should have. Gabrielle Union too, the wife of Vivien.
She's been in every. We were
amazing.
looking IMDb because I thought Mos Def was somebody else. I totally had him mixed up with somebody else, and I won't say who because it was so.
I might have been the one messing you up with that. I think I might have said that.
Did you?
I think I might have said on the podcast, but I'm not going to say anything more. People can.
They'll draw their own conclusions, but it was just a movie that I had seen before that I really, really liked. And Stanley and I'm like, I don't think this is the same person. And then I couldn't find it, so I won't spoil it. But we did figure out him, and she is in a lot of good things, and she's very diverse in the movies that she's taken and the roles. But she's always been excellent too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she was huge in this movie, even though in a very small role.
Very powerful.
You know who else was excellent?
Who?
The third person's talking. People might not know if they didn't watch the service this week, but David Banks pinch hit this week. I knew I had to drop my daughter off at college, and just wanted to kind of spend a little bit of extra time with her. So I'd reached out to another one of our church members, Stanton Reed. Our worship team had reached out, and Stanton was prepared to do it. But then he had a death in the family that took place. His father-in-law passed away this last week. And what I love Stan so much because he was still ready to do it. And we said, you're not letting us down by taking time to be with your family. It's okay. We will figure this out. And so I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday. Was it Wednesday?
It might have been Wednesday.
It might have been Wednesday.
Oh my!
It might have been Wednesday. It was Wednesday that we reached out to Dave and said, "Hey, any chance that you might be willing?" I was kind of preparing to look at a flight back from Collegedale, and David was gracious enough to take it on a Wednesday. Which, if you haven't heard the sermon, let me just say. I told David this out in the lobby before we came in here. I said, I would hate to see what you could do if you had a month, because that was, 2 days. I mean, God just really spoke through David, and it was just a really right on target for that movie. And I was so blessed. I was watching it online and just really appreciate it. David, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I felt like it was a tribute in a way from God that I don't know how many other people that we have as members that could have jumped in on just a short notice and just found like every great detail of the movie and everything that I wrote down when I was preparing for the podcast today. And I was like, oh man, he picked that one out. He picked that one. Like there wasn't anything left.
No.
He picked all the good stuff out of the movie. And I also felt like it was God letting Stanton know that I've got you.
Yeah.
And David just knocked it out of the park. And it was just a blessing to because even if you're like, well, it's a death in the family, but I really, I prepared a message.
Yeah.
And I've only spoke maybe 6 or 7 times, but if I'd have been, they're like, yeah, last minute can't do it. I'd have felt really bad because you put a lot of time, you put a lot of effort, a lot of prayer, and you're like, well, I don't get to deliver my message.
Yeah.
So I just
part of me that thinks maybe we just need to invite Stanton back to do part 2 because I think you would have. I think it'd be interesting to see the different nuances and different perspectives on it because I know Stanton would have just done an equally amazing job with it. But yeah, like I said, I was just impressed that David on Wednesday, and here's that cracked me up because I was talking to my wife about this, and I said, I heard David say he watched the movie, he watched the documentary, he read a 18-page paper that was put out in the 80s or sometime in the Washington Post or something.
Washingtonian, yeah.
And he also managed to buy Vivien's biography and read that too, right?
Yeah.
In the space of 2 days. So
how was the biography? When I watched the movie today, I thought he must have a biography out there. I got to get it.
He does, yeah. And it's the miracle of Amazon can deliver anything overnight. So that was really the blessing there. But yeah, no, the biography is really good. Goes into much deeper detail. His clinical sophistication was really remarkable. What the abilities he had, it just comes through in the book. And then his own commitment to service and just his development of other people.
What's the name of the book?
It is, the version I got is the title of the movie, but it's got another subtitle to it. But
So maybe we ought to set up the movie for people who haven't heard the sermon or haven't watched the movie. And so, David, I get to do it.
Well, I think you picked it. You said it was one of your favorites.
Yeah.
So why don't we do this? Why don't you give us your synopsis, and then we'll see how that connects with David's.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Sure.
I'm not putting you up against.
No. So, this is going to be fun.
All right.
Okay. So, was it the 40s or so, David, that this took place? And I'm trying to remember.
The story starts in 1930.
1930.
Yeah, they're in Nashville, Tennessee.
And so a guy with the last name of Blalock, whose first name evades me. Alfred, thank you. Alfred Blalock was a pretty prominent surgeon in that area. And a young man by the name of Vivien Thomas was looking for work. He had wanted to be a doctor, but circumstances hadn't worked out for that to happen. But he was very interested in medicine. So he became an assistant for Blalock, and what I think probably what's pretty profound about it is that, as you'll see in the movie if you read your history, Blalock went on to do some pretty profound work within medicine and surgery, kind of performing the first heart surgeries on infants. And Blalock arguably would not have been able to do what he did without Vivien Thomas's help. Thomas was absolutely instrumental in making that happen, was very much an equal partner with Blalock in that. However, Vivien Thomas, being African American, did not, and in that time period, that Jim Crow period, did not get the same recognition by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, he was very much overlooked. And as the movie kind of shows, Blalock kind of half-heartedly tries at times to do the right thing, but he never really gets there. And so part of this movie, part of this story is how somebody who's been marginalized finds the courage to continue on even when they're being mistreated. That's a part of the story. And the other part of the story is, I think, a part that is important for people like me to think about is that those of us who have privilege in our life, how are we going to use it? Are we going to half-heartedly try to help those who have less privilege than us, or are we going to put ourselves on the line for them? David used a very poignant moment in that movie, in the sermon, where Blalock actually moves from Vanderbilt up to Johns Hopkins, a very, very prestigious move for him. And he brings Vivien with him. And they kind of come through the front doors of Johns Hopkins. And to make a long story a little bit shorter, basically Vivien gets told, no, you have to go through the back door. And Blalock kind of half-heartedly says, well, do you know who I am?
He's with me.
He's with me. Yeah. Do you know who I am? And the guard says, I don't really care who you are. And it's rules are rules. He needs to go through the back door. And Blalock says, all right, well, I'll meet you in the back. So it's really a story about so much there's so much richness to it, and so the movie for me is just very, very thought provoking. Yeah, the reason I actually saw it was because when I was working on my master's degree, it was one of the required viewings for my class on leadership and diversity. When I saw the movie, I was like, I've never heard of this movie. What is this all about? And I watched it, and it really profoundly touched me, which is one of the reasons why I picked it for the summer series.
All right, Mr. Banks, would you concur? Anything you would add, subtract?
No. I was not familiar with the movie. I had not seen it. I agree with what Ken said. It was just such a powerful story. So, I mean, as a movie, it's really well acted, and the staging and the photography, it's all really interesting. Picks up a lot of momentum towards the end of the movie. It really picks up steam, I think. But the story and the context, you just can't help but be moved by Vivien Thomas's ability to persist in the face of just overwhelming obstacles, and he manages to keep going and ends up having an incredible impact. Just, for years. I had mentioned in the sermon, I had a chance to talk to some of our surgeons at Advent Health, and to the person, they all knew Vivien Thomas. It's like, oh, no, he is the guy who did everything that the movie claimed he did.
Wow.
So,
well, I found, let's start with the lobby, because that was something I had picked up on, and something that was one of my favorite things that you actually brought attention to in the message. And speaking of the statue in the lobby at Johns Hopkins, you said having Jesus in the lobby means nothing if his words are not in your heart. And you followed it with, there are a lot of the signs that are now gone that used to be visible to people about racism and segregation. And a lot of those are gone, but a lot of it is just settled in people's hearts. And that made me think of, like, what is the difference between doing the right thing because you kind of have to, because Blalock definitely needed Vivien as much or more, even though there's no door in without Blalock, but without Vivien, there is no other. So it's, chicken and egg thing. And is there a difference between because you have to, or doing the right thing because you see the true value, you have Jesus in your heart, and you see the true value of that person as an equal, or maybe not as a medical professional equal, but as a need equal, and as God's creation as an equal person? Even if the outcome is the same, is there a difference? Or can we start at, I'm doing it because I think I should or I have to, and eventually work to the other?
Yeah, I think, it's definitely plays into Vivien's hands that he's so good and that Blalock needs him. All right. There's an efficiency, or just a pragmatic sort of benefit that he's getting. But I think that's what was so powerful about the scene when he says, I thought it was different in here.
Oh, yeah.
Because Vivien does a great job of saying, I knew society would let me down. I knew my organization would let me down. I didn't think you would let me down. And so to me, it does matter, because he was expecting something to be more personal and authentic between the two of them. And it clearly wasn't for Blalock. He really was needing him to get done what he needed. He did provide some opportunities for him. But if you do read in the biography, it's really what frayed their relationship at the end. Blalock became more angry and upset near the end of his life, and never would give Thomas credit. This was a theme that he just kind of doubled down on as he got older.
So, because the movie doesn't quite get to that point.
They stop short.
But if you watch the movie and you get to the Belvedere hotel scene,
yes,
where he's standing behind the plant,
it's devastating.
And if you don't cry a little bit there, it's just that just rips your heart out and stomps on it, as you have seen the backstory with him and his wife. They've got kids, and she's like, I don't want to be here. I want to be in Tennessee where we had a good life. And, and he finds out he's a level 3, which is a janitor, even though he's doing the work of. And one of my favorite lines in the whole movie was his wife saying, well, I got you a raise. It's $25 extra a month on top of what you're already making. And she's like, oh, to do what he's already been doing.
Yes.
And she politely walks away and just allows that to sink a little bit. And so at each of these steps, you see Vivien wanting that taste of what he knows he can do. And I don't know if in the biography, if it mentions the part where he is operating early on, trying to, figure out the tools and figure out the steps. But he's got his hands inside one of the dogs and he's working. And the other doctor comes in and goes, "What are you doing?" He's like, his eyes are closed. "Can you see?"
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, "Yeah, I can see." And he's in there and, this is this. And he's telling him what he's doing. And if with that kind of talent to know what you can do, but know that there's not but the way that you have to get there is this other really disgusting sort of way that you have to do it. And you're never seen as an equal. That is,
well, the title of the movie comes from, a great scene where Blalock is assessing the suture that he's done, that Vivien Thomas has done, and he's feeling inside, the chest cavity of the dog. And he's like, "I can't feel it." He goes, it feels like something the Lord made. And even in Blalock there's this respect and the sense of, oh my goodness, this guy's good. And you can just see the seeds of self-doubt and insecurity creeping in, which became really the Achilles heel for Blalock, as he just was insecure about Thomas's incredible capabilities.
And following that scene after the surgery, when he calls him in and he overhears two colleagues using derogatory language, but saying how it was Vivien that bailed him out. And if it wouldn't have been for Vivien, that would not have been a success.
That's
that
right.
First one wouldn't have happened. And there's so many times where you feel like you start championing Blalock a little bit. We only page doctors. He grabs the phone and he's mad and he's, you need to be in here. And so there's little victories, and you can see it in Vivien's eyes, like, wow, I am a part of the team. And but every time the door keeps slamming shut in his face over and over. And you just get so frustrated with the whole thing. And part of it made me think about that you work so hard, and even Blalock, he has his near-death experience that he describes, and he's talking about that I swore if I made it through this, I was going to do something specific with my life, and almost the power struggle or the self-importance that it gave him to I have to make this, and I don't care who I walk over to get there.
Yeah.
But he did find what he felt like. God, this is I forget how he described it. He asked, "Well, do you want to?" Vivien asked him, "You sure you want to go out on this limb?
Yes.
Babies?" And he's like, "Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know it in my heart. This is what I want to do." But where does that intersect? Because we see the stress that this puts on his marriage when his wife is like, "Yeah, it's been 23 days since you've been home before 11 p.m. But I know what it's like to be a doctor's wife. I know the expectations." And even for Vivien, who's working another shift at home to keep his rent low, to fix the plumbing and fix the stairs. So many of us take a long time to figure out what we're supposed to be or what God's calling for us is. And then when you get there, you just want to dump all of it, right? You want to take everything you have and dump it there. But then you see the family side that takes such a beating on that, and that's those should be equally important. How do we balance that? I think that's part of I thought one of the ways that maybe from the movie we can take something positive out of how we can, both men working so hard to provide, Vivien provide for the family, and there's got to be a balance in there, but it has to be disheartening to finally figure out what you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do, and then still not find balance in your life.
I think it's really important to acknowledge that both men did work hard, but Vivien worked harder.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you mentioned he was doing everything at work, and then he was having to go do other things to earn enough money to keep himself afloat, to keep doing what he was called by God to do, what he was made to do by God. And so I think it's really kind of important to acknowledge that. I don't want to take anything away from the fact that Blalock worked hard and was a hardworking, good surgeon. At the same time, the two aren't equal. It's not the same thing. It's not the same situation. Vivien Thomas had to do, twice the work to get, just a fraction of the pay, a fraction of the respect in the community. And so I think as we look at that, I think it's worth going back to your question a little bit, Randy. So the question is whether you are more like Blalock or you're more like Thomas. How do you make time for your family? How do you create space in a challenging work environment? But we all need to work to support our families. At least that's what I think that's the way we usually phrase it, right? We work to support our families. I think that if some of us are a little bit more honest, we work because we like to work.
Well, there's always,
the bonus is that there's a paycheck at the end of it. But if you really enjoy your work, sometimes it can be hard to tear yourself away from it,
especially if it's God's calling. To me, that's the challenge, right?
And so for me, I know in my life, it's when I like to work. I enjoy it. I find that I really enjoy what I'm doing right now a lot. And so for me, part of my journey, what I have to do to be a healthy human being is realize that work belongs in one place of my life, but it isn't my whole life. And that can be a really hard thing for me to do, especially I think as a pastor, because your church invades a lot of space in people's lives. And when you're a pastor, it's hard to color the boundaries and keep inside the lines. But I think it's all important for all of us to stop and kind of figure out where those lines are. Where does work end? When does your family need to take priority? There are times where, if somebody has passed away, that's going to take a little bit of priority over some of the other family things that are going on in my life. That's a time I need to do something a little bit differently. But there are plenty of other emergencies that aren't emergencies that I choose to go, I like doing that, so I'm going to go do that for a little while. And it's easy to let moments with your family, with the people that matter most, your friends, slip by and not really focus. And to me, that's a little bit of what this movie is about: is seeing people as human beings, not objects to be manipulated. Because that's really what it comes down to with Blalock, is he's manipulating the objects in his life to accomplish and help him get the ego boost that he needs to feel like a worthwhile human being.
When you see it in the interaction with the two spouses. So Vivien's spouse is, and I will tell you the best compliment I got from my wife on the sermon was referencing Vivien's wife. And always listening to your spouse in these key moments. She said, okay, finally you said something I agree with. But she was not as supportive early on because just the load and having to move towns and all that sort of thing. But you see, she has the ability to understand that this is Vivien's calling. I love her counsel that says he's like, my mind is still in that lab. And it's painful to watch him do non-meaningful work. Mm-hmm. When he's selling those, he's a door-to-door salesman for pharmaceuticals. It's painful to see someone of that capability reduced to that. And her counsel of your head's there, your heart's there, get whatever you have to do to get yourself back through that door, do it. And so supportive and understands the magnitude, which is like, wow, that's a team right there. Compare that with Blalock's wife, which, you've already referenced. It's just, you can see it's more manipulation. Yeah. It's more, I'm doing, Blalock's doing this because of the grandeur, the ego, the reputation. And you just see it in those two relations play out really nicely in the movie.
And when she's fixing she starts a part-time job driving on base for the ambulance, and then she's fixing it while he's telling her, "Man, it was a success." She's like, "Oh, congratulations on the baby!" And by the way, I'm fixing this army vehicle, which is more important to me right now than what you're doing, because I know that I'm not really part of what you're doing. Where you're right, the others were a team. And speaking of that part, that was another one. Speaking of the advice from his wife to basically swallow his pride, and I'm just like, because you're like, man, if you've been watching this movie, you're thinking, burn it down, Vivien, burn it down, and you're feeling like he should walk away. This stinks, and he'd speak his mind, but then you see him doing the other that you just mentioned, and it's like, oh, that's even worse because he's so much more than this. And you said he refused to let the deficiencies of others rob him of his God-given talents and abilities. He's not going to let lesser people define him. Man, that is so hard when you have to go back and swallow your pride. And it's even harder if you're doing it because maybe all you have is a paycheck. It may not be that you found what God wants you to do. And clearly he had the talent. He had the drive, he had the smarts, he had the dexterity. I mean, it was a complete package. And so how do you even help someone go through and to say, I can do this. I can swallow this down and choke it down, and I can do it no matter what situation.
For me, it was the hardest part of the movie, and it's what I think HBO got right about this movie as well, is it's easy in this scenario to really want to celebrate Vivien Thomas because he just worked so hard and miss the fact that he shouldn't have had to. And what I love they do in the movie is his brother doesn't make it, right? So his brother's caught up in his own civil rights struggle for equal pay for teachers in Nashville, and the fight breaks him. The fight doesn't break Vivien to the same level. And so you want to celebrate the guy that makes it, and you should. But then part of the white narrative is, oh, see, you can do it if you just try hard enough. Vivien is a Michael Jordan character. He is such an outlier in his abilities and his ability to persist, not just his own physical and mental capabilities in the lab. And so to me, what was the hardest part of the movie is when, with all the injustice that's heaped on him, for him to be able to look Blalock in the eye, who's his character, and say, I made a mistake. I want to come back. And then just notion of what's going to be different. Well, it's not about you. And you can see it on Blalock's face. He's like, it's always been about, what do you mean it's not about me?
He's so smug. And
he says, and you can just kind of see his countenance drop just a little bit. And he says, it's about the work. And I said in the sermon, and I meant it, it's like I felt like I was getting into hyperbole, but that really felt like a Christ-like moment to me where Vivien is saying, my work here is so important, I can't let other things distract it, and there's every reason that I should and could be justifiably distracted. No one would fault me for walking out of here, and some would think I should because I shouldn't take what this guy's giving me. But somehow he presses through it, and over time he's rewarded. But even in the way he's rewarded, I love the way the movie at the end does not relieve the viewer of seeing the wear and tear of the journey.
Yeah, what it took from him.
So when he's back in that lobby and he's at the end of his career, Blalock's been dead for 15 years.
Yeah.
He's settled. But you can see the wear and tear of the battle. This is not and I said it in the sermon, I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but I don't like the way the book of Job ends. You get everything back, and you get it twice as much. It's like, hey, good work. It's like a Disney fairy tale ending. They avoided the fairy tale ending in this, in that, yes, Thomas gets his picture on the wall. Yes, he gets some recognition, but they don't relieve the audience of this took everything out of this man to do it.
And the people, it wasn't lost on me that the people in the front row were the doctors who stopped Blalock in the hall, who said, you can't do this. You've given hope to the family. You can't do this. You're doing this just for yourself, which it felt like he wasn't wrong. And all these people that were ready to throw Blalock out because even the little bit that he did stand up for the pay raise, the little bit that he did try to stand up here and there, they were ready to throw him out. And now it just feels like a little self-serving that we're all standing and clapping because you got your picture, your painting to go in the hall, and you got your honorary, doctorate.
Yeah, which turns out not to even be an honorary medical degree. So
really?
For whatever reason, they could not give. So it's actually an honorary degree of law.
No, come on.
So even in the recognition, there's just a little bit. I will tell you that one of my other favorite things that I didn't reference it because we do a lot of work around innovation, and it's a great story about innovation because there's doubters all along. And there's the one character who is the naysayer, like you said. You can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. They successfully do the surgery. I love how they cut to he's an older, bald man. He looks like he's in his 70s. I don't know. And the first thing he says is, we did it.
Yeah, right.
It's 30 seconds ago, you were Mr. Naysayer. And that is the innovator's problem. They have to drag all this stuff along. Naysayers, the second they have success, look what we did. It's like, you didn't do anything. You were, So anyhow, it was just a little moment I appreciated.
Yeah.
Though, and what I want to say about naysayers is the good thing about naysayers is that I think that they do force innovators to think harder about what they're doing.
Sure.
That doesn't make them fun.
No.
And they surely, and in some ways it's very galling to hear somebody say we did it when it's like I carried you on my back, and in fact, not only did I carry you on my back, but you were trying to pull me backwards while I was going. But I've had people like that in my life that, because my natural tendency is to see possibilities. Oh, let's try this, let's try that, and so I've kind of found that I actually need one or two of those people to kind of hold me back a little bit and not run too fast, because when I run too fast, when I don't have anybody like that, I tend to make silly mistakes and not think as deeply as I should. But when I have somebody who's on top of me all the time, and like that's not going to work, I really have to think it through a little bit more. And so if you're a naysayer, remember to be a nice naysayer, and remember that being negative isn't really a spiritual gift. Being thoughtful and honest critiques are worthwhile. On the other hand, if you're an innovator, just remember you do need those people in your life who will make you think a little bit harder and who will make you reflect more than you might naturally do.
Yeah. Well, and that first baby Eileen, their first case, only survived 4 months. So it was clinically successful. She didn't live long, though. And so
they made it seem like it would be days if they didn't in the movie. And I don't know if that was accurate as well. But
yeah, I mean, the babies lived about 3 years, but she wasn't going to have a good outcome.
Yeah.
But even in that case that they're celebrating, the case, the baby Eileen case, she doesn't survive long term.
Yeah.
And so,
man,
I don't know where the naysayers were there, but it was a very complicated thing they were trying to do.
Yeah.
You got to that point about 2 questions before I was going to ask it about the naysayers, because it was just so maddening how everyone can, like, there were very few people. The one doctor that came in like that one time and was just like, well, this is an interesting case. What are you doing? And could I come and work with you a little bit? As people started to warm up and to see like past the differences and to see that, man, this guy was a genius. And when they asked for the retractor, and she's like, I don't see a retractor. And he's like, and Vivien says, oh, it's that one over there, the one I made.
Yeah.
Of course you don't know what it is. I actually made that. And and when he made the respirator and all these cool things, and
it's crazy.
Everyone's amazed, but then it just all goes into the bigger pile of this is our success. And part was of course not lost. But when Vivien, you said, Vivien was this going back to when he realized he was never going to get that recognition from Blalock. And you said Vivien just wanted to hear his name and understand that his contribution was part of the success. And then you went on to ask a really important question. I think maybe the highlight of the message. You said, is it different in here, meaning at church, at Whole Life Church? Mm-hmm. There are those who society will not acknowledge, those who organizations, maybe even our church at times, will refuse to acknowledge. But what about here? What about in here? Will we acknowledge? Whatever it is that's keeping someone on the outside, let us say the name and recognize them and see them.
Yeah.
That was something that I think we all need in front of us on a really regular basis, thinking about anyone that we would, for whatever reason, choose to exclude. And it makes you think of, is there anyone that I don't want at church? Or is there someone that I wish, someone that is at church, someone that is in here that I wish wasn't? And there's been times in my life when I could have answered those questions yes and yes. But now I try to think of, like, even if I don't like you, I don't want you not to be here. And even if we don't get along, I still think I can have a genuine, nice interaction.
Right.
You know what I mean? But like you said, the signs have settled in people's hearts.
Yeah. The thing I loved about Whole Life Church, we've been members there 22 years. And, Andy McDonald would always say, I want someone who's never set foot in a church to walk in the side door and immediately feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And he's also had conversations historically with people that said, if you're looking for the most conservative expression of an Adventist church, you're going to be disappointed because it's not going to be here. And so for me, the notion that someone would not be welcome in church, and this can go a lot of different ways, but at the most basic level, I can't. Well, and it goes back to why the statue I thought was such a powerful part of the movie. Jesus's words are inclusive and welcoming, and they somehow get translated to, this doesn't apply to you. It's like no, we're not going to acknowledge you. We've already made a judgment about you. You're actually can't be a member here. I don't know where that fits in. I don't, and I realize listen, I work for a large organization and there's rules and policies. And my wife is fond of saying, Christianity is really good as a movement. It's not as great as an organization.
Oh, wow.
Because Jesus' ministry was a movement. It's like, let's go, people. We're acknowledging people. We're coming together. We're all, and it disappoints me when you see organized religion, our own church, start to make delineations about, we don't recognize you. It's like, man, I don't know who Jesus wouldn't recognize. And so for him to hear his name and just know that he's part of the family, I agree with you. The scene when he's in the back of the Belvedere Hotel, he's had to sneak in, he's hiding behind a plant. It's just like he just wants to be seen. He of something in his case he's earned. What's different in our situation?
Yeah, we have an all.
I mean, we have the grace of Christ that just says you get to come in, you get to be in the ballroom. Of course, we're going to say your name. But yet, it's often the church that becomes the barrier. So I can say these things. See, Ken gets fired if he says these things. This is the good thing. Yeah.
Though, I think it does speak a little bit. I will say this. I was going to go a little more direct on that, and I thought I can't get Ken in trouble. Oh, you should have got me in trouble. It would have been okay. It would have been okay. I think to me that whole scene that you pointed out with Christ, the statue of Christ in the lobby there at Johns Hopkins, and that whole scene taking place, and the movie makers very intentionally having Christ hovering over this this interaction. It reminds me when I lived in New Zealand for a year, I was told to take pictures. In the first week, I would take as many pictures in the first week as I could. They said because by the time you get to week 2, 3, 4, 5, it'll just look normal to you.
Oh, interesting.
And they were right. Like New Zealand is one of the most gorgeous places on the face of the earth, as far as I'm concerned. It's just amazing. But it is amazing how everything just starts to look like you're normal when you are used to seeing it. And one of the beautiful things is that I enjoyed was that I had Ken Rogers, who was the chaplain of Southern Adventist University at that time, come and visit me while I was there, and to have him to take him around and let him see it for the first time reminded me of how beautiful it was. And so where I'm running with this metaphor is just simply, I think that sometimes we take Christ for granted, and he just fades into the background. He's there, and we just like, oh yeah, that's. He's over there somewhere. I mean, the guard, you can't tell me that guard even thought about the statue of Jesus Christ being there and what that might symbolize. It's the open arms. And to me, one of the most powerful lines that you gave, things that you said in your sermon, Dave, was that we should fight to bring people in through the front door. But if we can't win that fight, we should go back through the back door with them. That landed with me. I mean, Blalock could have easily said, if he's not coming through the front door, neither am I.
Yeah,
I'm going to walk around with you. Vivien, I'm going to be there with you. It's going to be Alfred and Vivien together, And so for me, I think as Christians, we need to never let Christ fade into the background and become our normal. And I think that one of the ways that we can appreciate it's one of the things that I don't want to fade for me about whole life and my experience at whole life is that one of the things I love the most is what you said that Andy very intentionally created at Whole Life is a place that anybody can come in through the side door, the back door, the front door and feel loved, cared about. And I've watched it happen time and time again in the year that I've been here. I have seen atheists and agnostics come into our church. I've seen people from other religions entirely come into our church, and I have seen people from other denominations come into our church. And what I resoundingly hear back is that they feel loved, they feel cared about, they feel accepted, and they feel wanted, and they want to come back again.
Yeah,
that's Jesus.
Absolutely.
You just and there's something wrong with church. There's something fundamentally wrong with church when that's not what's happening. When only the saints are welcomed and feel like they should be there. And probably most of those saints secretly have imposter syndrome too, realizing that if everybody knew what was really going on in my family and my own personal life, I probably wouldn't be welcome here either. But that's what, I just would second. I hope to be a good steward of what Andy began and to continue on and expand that further. It doesn't matter whether you are black or white or Asian. It doesn't matter whether you are LGBTQ or whatever you may be, that people say, oh, well, until you this, that, or another, no, church is for everybody. And you shouldn't have to do anything different from the church than what you have to do for Christ.
Right.
To belong. And Christ says to me, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. And it's just one of those things that I just feel really passionate about. I feel like everybody should come to church. And I think we should spend a little less time worrying about whether we're changing people and a little bit more time worrying whether we're making people feel loved so that they can experience Christ, and let Christ do what Christ is always going to do in people's life. The Holy Spirit, as I read the Bible, is the one that produces change in people's lives. And the Holy Spirit does it in the Holy Spirit's time and the Holy Spirit's way. And I think that we ought to just focus on what I think we're called to do, which is live the life we think that we're supposed to be living and love people along that lines. And then people will, when change needs to happen, it's been amazing to me in my career as a pastor. My preaching rarely changes anybody. Rarely, in my opinion. I love to preach. I hope that people hear something useful and that there's some help. But what I notice that changes people is loving community. That's what it is. It's when the people are supported and cared about by the people who are sitting in the chairs inside the church, and they get a good word, hopefully, on Saturday, but they're in community with other people who are praying for them, who care about them, who love them, whether they make mistakes or don't make mistakes, or if they're trying to overcome tobacco or alcohol, that we're more worried about loving that person than whether there are cigarette butts on the pavement on the way in. And so. Right. And so anyway, so that's I guess I got on a little bit of a hobby horse, or I don't know.
High horse. I like that. I like that horse because I totally agree. But I want to go back real quick because I liked what you said. If you're not going to walk out the front door with them, walk out the back door with them, and that's something they could have done. But some would look at the film and say, well, Blalock for his time was way ahead of the curve. And so let's give him credit for that one. And he didn't walk in the front door with him, but he did send him up to the lab by himself and just assumed that he would, everyone else would allow him to be there. And of course, he gets flacked from the moment he gets there. And the doctor puts $1 on the table and tells him that he wants a coffee. And he gives it back to him and says, no, you got the wrong person. And he goes they use the white bathroom together. And people are looking. And of course, that was a big no-no.
Right.
So my question is, it's very easy to go, if you're Blalock, and he says it in different parts of the movie. Well, I gave him an opportunity no one else was going to give him. I've treated him with respect. I set him up in the lab, and I've given him, basically carte blanche while he's in the lab. And, where else are you going to get this opportunity? He's not a doctor. He doesn't have a medical degree. He's a carpenter. How do you, to balance, make sure we're not patting ourselves on the back because for whatever reason, we get good feedback or we get, someone says something nice about us. Like this week, it just made me think. Someone came up afterwards and said, Raleigh, I hope you're listening. His daughter's fiance's mom was watching from California. And so, we always like to say, let us know as an online host, where you're watching from. And I said, hey, hello to Karen in California and Pac from Dundee, United Kingdom. He's always there. And then there was one more person. And they were like, man, she was so tickled pink just because you mentioned her name. And I'm like, well, that's what we want to do. We want to create family. And we do. I care that Karen from California is watching. I don't know who she is, but as the online host, I'm excited that there's someone there who's reaching out and wants to engage with us. And so it made me think of, that seems like a really nice thing. And aren't we a warm church? And aren't we doing some really good things? But at the same time, when you look at the big picture and you look past those, are we missing the big things in the room? Like I didn't walk in the front door with them, or I didn't do the really hard thing because I did see the cigarette butt going down, and I didn't immediately just walk out there and shake their hand and make them feel warm in the moment when they might really be going, I don't know if I should go into church.
Mm-hmm.
I also want us to think about those, because that made me think of, I'm sure there's blind spots in me at church not being as welcoming or as forthcoming to provide that atmosphere as I should be. Because I have comfort zones at church. I have people I like to talk to. I have little circles I like to pick out. I like to see, when I see David there, I like to go and pick his brain on his latest podcast that he might be listening to make sure my feed is up to par. And so there's those things. How can we make sure that we're just focused and that we're not missing opportunities to only be mediocre, but to be really, 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 really intentional?
Well, for me, it would be listening and seeking out some conversations. Because imagine in the movie, instead of slamming the drawer shut at the file cabinet, right, as Dr. Blalock is very upset, just imagine that scene playing out differently. All right, let's talk. I want to listen to you. I'm obviously not understanding something. I need to. You're acting, because he is confused by him. I think you can give Blalock credit. He's genuinely confused when he walks in with the resignation letter. It's like, what is this? And you're right. It's like, I have done all these things for you. He's truly shocked by what's happened. I think we can use that feeling of shock to say, well, what is this? Why am I shocked here? I'm actually not understanding what's happening. What is it I'm actually not understanding? I think I understand that you're ungrateful and I've done for you. Maybe I'm not understanding actually what's happening. And I don't know how we create that space to do that, because I think it's very difficult. But to me, that's where it would happen. When I see someone at church, Randy, I totally get what you're saying. It's like, I'm busy. I'm teaching Sabbath school. I got. It's like, what happens if you just pause and listen and say, okay, you tell me.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll get that from my work. It's like, let me tell you something that went wrong at the hospital. It's like, oh, great. I don't want to hear this.
Yeah.
Versus it's like, okay, why don't you tell me?
Yeah.
Maybe I don't understand actually how you experience something that I think I do understand.
That I understand, yeah.
To me, there's got to be some gaps or some openings that would allow that kind of exchange to happen. Because I really don't know what your experience is. And if I left myself open to it, what might that create?
Because, I feel Ken, as a senior pastor, going, we've got a legacy. I want to keep it going, and I feel like we're doing a pretty good job of it. And we all know.
Is. Yeah. And speaking to. Trust me, he's fine.
No. And we've all heard, good stories, and we've seen our congregation really change. And so I think that whatever we're doing and it can't be just from the front, although I do appreciate
the front matters. Yeah.
Our values are consistently, that's one of my favorite things about Whole Life Church, is our values are consistently reaffirmed, told and reaffirmed, and why. Because I have to know that for me. I have to know what we're doing, why we're doing it. And when you buy in and you realize that it is what Jesus would want us to do, it's easy to get on board. And then it's a matter of just, continuing to pray that God molds you into the person that can be one of these people. But it takes all of us to do this the right way.
I want to kind of see if we can transition ourselves from this movie to the next one we're going to do, and see if I can do this. But the first thing I want to say is that the most important things in a church aren't always the most prominent things. The most important things in society aren't always the things that get recognized the most. And the person at Whole Life Church who makes a point of coming into the church and finding 2 or 3 people that they don't recognize and saying hi and being friendly and just trying to get to know people they don't recognize, that's every bit as important as what I'm doing, is getting up front and preaching. And I think when you get up front and preach, that tends to get a lot of recognition. But if the whole congregation is cold, what does the preaching matter?
Yeah, no, for sure.
People, and so the whole point to me of church is to allow people to come in contact with Christ so he can bring about transformation in their lives wherever he knows it needs to take place, wherever that may be. And the second part of what I wanted to say with this is also that takes humility. It means that whatever role God's giving you to play, you need to play that role with humility, whether that's me or whether that's whoever it may be at church. We all have to have humility. That's one of the things that Vivien had in spades and Blalock struggled with his whole life with, because for Blalock, one of the reasons he didn't give Vivien credit was because he thought it would diminish who he was. If he were to admit that Vivien played a big role, that it would have diminished him. And it probably would have diminished him in the moment that he was in. But I think that he was a little, and it's easy for all of us to do, but he was a little short-sighted, because what it would have in the legacy, it would have only made him a greater person. He would have gone down, and that's what. So true. And I think that's what we're going to see as we come into this week. For those who are listening right now, we've already showed the A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood on Tuesday night, and we're going to be talking about it in church. But the movie centers around the story of a reporter and the very famous Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, graduate of Rollins College right here in our own Orlando. And so, but this is what Fred did so magnificently, is that Fred had almost no ego. Or if he did, he had found a way to suppress it. It wasn't...
It's the sweaters.
It wasn't about maybe that probably maybe that's
it was the shoe catch for me.
Okay.
All the time, he never missed.
So the thing about greatness in God's paradigm is that greatness is humility. It's the willingness to do whatever it takes to do the job that needs to be done. And if you get recognition for it, that's great. And if you don't get recognition for it, that's great. And that's not an excuse for us not to do the right thing by people and recognizing people for the things that they do. But it's also an encouragement to me, because there's so many times I can't think of a time in my life. It's very hard for me to think of any awards that I've won that I felt like I deserved. But there's been a whole lot that I've been passed over that I was sure I deserved. And so for me, the thing about it is it's about humility, and Blalock needed more of it in his life. He would have been a happier person. He would have found greater satisfaction with his accomplishments. And as you pointed out, in that one scene where Thomas is pushing him around in the chair, he says, "I regret," and he stopped short. He was like, he was like the rich young ruler who just couldn't quite push himself over the edge and just say, "Vivien, I didn't treat you as well as I should have. Right. I did not do what I could have, and I want you to know it." And so, I think for me, the takeaway for everybody listening today is take a moment to be a little reflective on your life. If you can't think of somebody you've hurt, you're probably not thinking hard enough. Which is not to say we need to sit and beat ourselves up for everything that's gone wrong, but it's also a worthwhile thing to stop. And it's something that I've had to come to grips with in my life, because, as a young adult, I was and I'm maybe even to this day, but for sure I can reflect back and see just how I bullied some people. At the time, I didn't view it as bullying, but boy, now that I look back, boy, it was.
Yeah.
And I've tried to call and make amends with those that I could. There's some more that I still need to, but it doesn't hurt to stop and think, because even late in life, you can think back and go, okay, I could have done that better. And it would actually be worthwhile for me to admit that and to say, hey, I didn't do right by you, and I can't fix it, but I want you to know I recognize it. And if there are ways that I can make amends, I'm willing to do it.
Think of what that might have been, what it might have meant to Vivien.
Oh, yeah.
In that moment, to just hear him admit that, I could have been, even if I could have been so much better towards you, with you, for you.
Yeah,
that would have changed.
I love that scene too. Cinematically, it's really interesting. Just the way his voice breaks, he just so much conveys. But Ken, I love the way you said that. It's just, that insecurity shaped him and continued to deform him up until his death, which was very shortly after that last scene. And you're so right. You think about, it could have been a Lewis and Clark, Lennon-McCartney. It could have been Blalock and Thomas, right? Some of the greatest accomplishments come because people collaborate, put their heads together, and it just opens up so many things, and he just couldn't get there. And you see that at the end, the weight, you just never escape yourself.
Yeah.
And at the end, it's Blalock's self that's just, you can just feel the weight of it. I like your rich young ruler sort of analogy there. It's just a powerful moment to think about. How do I never be in that situation?
That you think enough of yourself that you can't pull yourself together, knowing after he's turned you down, he's not going with you.
No.
And this is your one last, if this is a true part of the story, that this is probably the last time you're going to see him. Very, very well could be.
True.
And it's right there. You know it's there. He knows it's there. And it's almost the tension of him going, is he going to say it? No way he says it. And he's going, does he know him? Does he know what I'm about to say? No, I can't say that.
Yeah.
And then we walk away and we leave it. And that's tragic. And that's regret. And so getting to our questions from the response, we had a lot of people who thank you for such a wonderful, compelling sermon today, Mr. Banks. Great message today. And Sharon Schofield said, value others above yourself. Jesus did this every day on earth, and pride has a way of affecting our relationships in church settings. What can we do to be more inclusive and lift others up? And do you think SDAs are doing better now, or do we have a long way to go? And I know we talked about this a little bit, about how we can help and we can reach out and lift others up maybe, but do you think as an overall church, or maybe we can just apply it to our church? I mean, are we doing better?
I don't know if we're doing better. I love the church we've been in. I feel like I get sometimes a warped view of what Adventism looks like.
Yeah.
I don't know. As a church at the highest level, I don't know if we're doing a better job. It feels like there's more division. I loved what Jan Paulson used to talk about when he was our GC president. And he talked about the best things that Adventists could be known for is to be relevant on the front lines of suffering in your communities. I don't hear us talking that way anymore. I hear us, we talk about it at Whole Life Church, but when I think of your bigger question, I don't know if we're doing that better. I hear a lot of, we've got rebellious sectors in our church, and we've got things that are trying to be undone. And there's kind of this suspicion like and I just don't think that's driving us to maybe this idea of being more open.
I think it's a good question about our church. I think an even more important question is me.
Yeah.
And that's where I've come to with my church. I feel very disappointed in some of the decisions that our church on the corporate level has made, whether it's women's ordination or the way that we ostracize certain groups of people.
Yep.
That disappoints me. But I have come to recognize that that's not something that at this point in my life I have any power over. All I have the power to do is what's within my sphere, and that sphere right now is Whole Life Church. And that's the place God's put me, and He's put me with my wife and my kids, and I can be a good dad, and I can make the difference in those areas of my life. And so that's for me where I've tried to quit worrying about, and I really would love it if some of the other critical parts of our church that are critical of the whole lives of and honestly that are critical of the more whatever side you don't agree with. I'd love it if we just focus a little bit more within the 3-foot window that we live within, and a little less with the overall. And I think if we all did that, probably things would find their way.
Yeah.
I don't know if they would get better, but at least the area that I'm in would be taken care of better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Marshall wants to know, what should we do with our regrets? Just like we talked about Dr. Blalock and Vivien sitting there and going, well, I don't know how many regrets Vivien had other than that I wished maybe things would have been a little bit different and I would have gotten a little bit more recognition during that time. And that's obviously very fair to feel that way. I don't know how many regrets he came out with, but clearly Blalock had regrets.
Well, my wife and I had a lot of conversation about Blalock's sentence. You haven't really lived until you've you haven't really lived if you don't have a lot of
I have
regrets. And it was like, is that true? To me, that's actually the one line in the movie. As much as I love his regret scene and I think it's real for him, it's like, I don't know if I agree with that statement. I don't know if living a good life means you've stacked up a lot of regrets. And maybe it's just how you choose to process your experiences. I don't know. But for Marshall, which I know Marshall's a wonderful human being. I think you just take from them what you can and move on. There's just no reason to stew in those.
To stew in it, yeah.
I agree. I don't think you need to stew in them. At the same time, you can use them as an opportunity to try to make amends where amends are a good thing to be made, to apologize. I think the worst thing you can do is live in regret like Blalock did and not do anything about it, not to actually – I mean, he had it completely within his power to say to Vivien, hey, look, I really messed up. I could have done so much better. Instead, he chose to live in his regret instead of use that regret to motivate him to do better.
I would rather not focus on the regret, but when it's brought to my attention, and it's not always easy, and like you said, you've made calls, and those are difficult things to do. Or when someone contacts you on social media after many years and goes, "You're such a jerk to me."
Are you the same jerk that you were back in high school?
Are you still that guy? And or if my wife brings up something and I'm like, I've never heard you say that before, and it's like, oh yeah, that was just totally uncool.
Yeah.
And you go, man, I am sorry. And if I could go back and take that back, even if I don't think that's how I intended it, it doesn't matter. That's how it came out, and that's how it made you feel. And I honor what you feel. That's on me. But then you have to let that go. You have to say, I am sorry. That's all you can do. You can't put the words back in your mouth, and you have to move on. But I would rather just take the humility route there and say, truthfully, I am sorry, and let's move on. If I can't stay there, because if you stay there, you never leave, and you just get stuck.
Yeah, I mean, you're sitting in front of a control board. To me, regret's just like feedback. You turn the knob. You take in the feedback, right? It's not that you ignore it. You make the adjustment, and
you move on.
And hopefully, you don't run into that again. But you don't ignore it. But you don't. You can
learn
adjust
from it too, and assume that if someone else is giving you that look when you're talking to them. It might also be one of those things that's like, well, I hope it's not one of, maybe I should reword that. Maybe or just ask, does that make you uncomfortable? Was that not cool?
Yeah.
And be more self-aware. And our last one is from, where did I lose it? Nashville Tim. He's got the best name online.
Nashville Tim.
Yeah, Nashville Tim. I wrote in the chat. He won best online name for the week because Nashville Tim.
Don't encourage him. I like to make him Orlando Tim.
There you go.
Oh, do we know Nashville Tim?
Oh, I know a Nashville Tim.
Well, Nashville Tim, if you're listening, we'd like to make you O-Town Tim. That sounds pretty good.
Tim. That sounds way better.
That sounds way better than Nashville Tim. Although I do love Nashville Tim, I'll have to agree.
Yeah.
How can we today continue to right the wrongs from the past? I mean, that's a broad overview kind of the movie. Like if we could just, what do we take away from this movie that maybe, like Ken talked about, our 3-foot window? If there's something you could take away from this in your 3-foot window, what would it be?
Well, I think this question came up from Craig, and I shared in the Q&A in church the experience I had when my daughter was graduating from University of Chicago, and they opened the service with saying, I want to just pause and let everyone know we are on tribal lands that were unlawfully taken. And in all honesty, in the moment, I'm like, guys, we're having a graduation. Why the downer? Let's move. And I caught myself, maybe not in the moment, but later thinking about, I don't know how to return the land. I can create enough space to hear the story, though. And start to realize, I'm connected to what's gone on before me. I know a narrow sliver of that. I could probably open up my aperture and hear broader. It's when you think about Vivien, so much wealth was taken from him. I don't know how you give that back to him, other than we can tell a story. We can try to listen to what are the other stories that are available to hear
and celebrate them.
It bothers me when people are offended, like, oh, you're just trying to tear us down, or why are you focusing on the negative? People's stories matter.
Yeah.
And getting that broadest exposure of how we got to where we are, you only have a sliver of the story. So leaving access, people are always surprised when you ask them, why is there a division street in Orlando? It's like, I don't know. Well, that was literally the dividing line of where you could live based on your race. It's like, you got to know the history of that street. You know that street. It's like, oh, Orlando was that, right? And it just starts to open up. Other windows can start to open up around, oh, okay, well, maybe that's, So to me, it's about listening.
It's about embracing discomfort.
Absolutely.
And it's being heard, right? That's what he wanted.
I think that a lot of times for those of us who weren't on the part of the side of history where there was suffering and hurt, it makes us feel guilty and bad to hear those stories. And we brush them aside and don't want to hear them because they make us feel uncomfortable. And I don't think there always is a way to make it right.
No,
I don't think
right.
you can give somebody back their life who's been lynched. Right. I don't think that you can ever make that right. What you can do is make the best amends that you can. What you can do is be respectful of that and ensure that there is a future without that.
Right.
And you don't make a future without that by brushing that side of history away, because when you say, well, that didn't happen, then you make it possible for it to happen in the future.
Yeah. Randy, you'd asked a question early on. The name of the book is Partners of the Heart.
Okay.
That's the Vivien Thomas autobiography, Partners of the Heart. I'd recommend it.
Well, it will be in today's show notes as always. So swipe up and that link will be there, probably to Amazon, because that's usually the first place when I search it. Coming up on this coming week, like Ken already said, we've already screened the movie. And, if we did this today, I might be available tomorrow to actually come to the church and catch one of them before.
Do it.
I'm going to give it a whirl. But we're going to finish up this series, Got on the Big Screen, with A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, starring Tom Hanks. I know from doing announcements, it's rated PG. And we will be doing that. There's all kinds of snacks and fun things. So bring a little pocket money, have a little fun, make the kids happy, come and see the film. And next week, what are we doing after this though? Do we know?
It's back to school, baby.
Back to school.
Back to school, baby. Yeah.
We're not previewing that movie, are we?
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that. So that we got on the big screen. This Saturday is the last one of that, and then we're doing a Saturday where we celebrate teachers and students, and we're going to talk about the importance of education. We're going to also, I think, have a little fun. I'm going to do something that one of my young adults a couple years ago challenged me to do. I was doing a talk on marriage. And the young adult came up to me and said, that's all fine and good, but when was the last time you did a sermon for singles? She said, you always focus on it and you make it seem like a person can't be complete if they're not married. Is that what you believe? And I said, no, that's not what I believe. And then I thought, but boy, that's sure the way I tend to preach. So I'm actually doing a sermon. I'm doing a sermon on being single. Mm-hmm. And then I'm doing a sermon on marriage after that. So we've got some fun things coming up.
If there is going to be a back to school sermon, I would volunteer to do it.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Rodney, I'm sure Rodney Dangerfield has some interesting theological implications.
I'm sure there would be.
Well, maybe we can schedule that for next year. Yeah,
next year.
We'll sign
well,
up.
and respect.
Two young guys. Oh man, this is probably 10, 12 years ago. Did a documentary on singles in the church.
Yeah,
I might have been one of those guys. So maybe I'll send you.
Send me a link to that documentary.
Your blockbusters, I'll send you this one just off on the side. No, I wanted to quick say that this was after our summer series. I mean, I just want to make sure everyone knows how blessed we are. The summer series, we had great guests, we had great messages. In our podcast episode, someone said, "You guys keep going longer and longer," and I'm like, we keep trying to cut it down. But I'm like, if you think about what we've been covering in these movies and over the summer series, there's been some really good things. And I've had other people say, go longer. Don't stop the conversation because what you guys are talking about, my heart needed to hear. So if we've gone a little bit long for summer series and for the blockbusters, I apologize, but I also know that a lot of what we've talked about has really been impactful for people, and so it's hard to apologize for that. If you need to listen to it on 1.5 sometimes, to get a little bit faster for the commute, I give you permission to do that. But just know that if you've missed any, don't. We've really had some impactful conversations, and even the bonus episode. If you needed a little lighthearted laughter, I was like a magician on this board, trying to keep everybody's on the laughs and then keep it from blowing out with Dan Merchant. If you didn't catch that, really good, just a little 15 minutes about Hollywood, which if you stop and listen to it, you think, there was a lot of really good stuff in just even the bonus. So thank you to all of our guests. Thank you, David, again, for just jumping in at the last minute. Thank you so much for making time out
of your day.
And I was excited because I was excited for my friend Stanton. And Stanton, if you're listening, we're definitely still praying for you.
Yep.
And we love you. But I was
Monica.
And
want to pray for Monica as well.
Wife, yep, that was her dad.
That's her dad. So.
When I heard David was our pinch hitter, I was like, yes, we are going to survive. This is going to be good. So it was a good week, even in the midst of tragedy. But thanks, guys, for listening, and have a great week.